Perfect start. Hey guys, Poro here with another guide, this time for my absolute favorite pick right now, Kayn top. When it comes to champions in League of Legends, I enjoy almost all of them. Every champion is unique in their own ways, both to play as and against. However, if you asked me to pick just one quality in a champion that I'd want to have in my games, I would answer with a champion that grants me the ability to solo 1v9 a game if I have the resources and skill to pull it off. Many of the classes can't simply carry a game alone that easily though. Mages carry high damage but are usually easy to kill. Marksmen can 1v9, but only with the help of a functioning team. Tanks can perform in every game without a team, but lack the firepower to win on their own. Assassins have the firepower, but can be itemized or positioned against with good enemy team play. If you want to find champions who have the ability to solo 1v9 a game, you'll usually be looking in the fighter-bruiser category. These champions have the raw damage to win most fights, the outplay potential to express individual skill, and the tankiness to survive most enemy comps. When I feel like the game is solely in my hands to win or lose, a bruiser is what I feel most confident on. Unfortunately, bruisers usually don't scale as well as some of the other damage classes, and become obsolete in a game when even or behind. While snowballing is a great way to win games, it's not consistent or reliable to just say you'll snowball to victory every time. As such, the second most important quality in a champion that I would want to have in my games is scaling. This is no new revelation, as the best top laners in the world climb the ladder with these scaling bruisers constantly. Jax and Aurelia have been carry top staples for years, to name a couple examples. These champions have extremely powerful item breakpoints, and can both teamfight and side lane very strongly. Even these champions though are susceptible to being outscaled if they can't get their items online before the game ends. See, another factor that stops champions from being able to solo win games all the time is lane matchups and counterpicks. It doesn't matter how well you can pilot Jax if you run into an equally skilled Garen or Olaf, and it doesn't matter how clean your Aurelia is when a Tryndamere is there waiting for you. So in an ideal scenario, there would be a champion who can win every lane, outscale every champion, adapt to every team comp, and have the tools to 1v9 a game. That's pretty much impossible. There's no way Riot would ever let a champion like that stick around permanently. And it's true, there is in my opinion no champ that wins every matchup, outscales every champion, adapts to every team comp, and 1v9s every game. But what if there were ways to eliminate some of those problems? A way to consistently hit those late game item spikes regardless of the lane matchup? As if it was an unintended glitch in the Matrix, there is one such champion that happened to have the stars align perfectly in such a way that they can become a true unstoppable 1v9 machine. You've seen the title of the video already, as well as the opening montage, so you know that this champion is Kayn. To understand what makes Kayn have the potential to fit this seemingly perfect champion description, a concept known as the power budget must be understood. Every champion in the game has a power budget, and it's best to think of it like a champion design scale that places strengths on one side and weaknesses on the other, but it has to be as close to equilibrium as possible. This concept applies to singular abilities, such as Gwen's W being an incredibly powerful immunity tool at the cost of having a very long cooldown, as well as entire design philosophies such as Kog'Maw dealing very high range damage at the cost of being completely immobile. Many of the champions in the game find their kits to be entirely balanced around this power budget, with some extreme examples that fundamentally shift how a champion functions. Swain is a case of this, as much of his allotted power budget went into the obscene amount of ranges W has. Due to this singular design choice, the chosen drawback to equalize this out was a low amount of AP scaling on many of his abilities. Other champions with playstyle defining power budgets include Kassadin's ultra-powerful rank 3 ultimate at the cost of generally low range on his basic abilities, Cassiopeia's unusually high early DPS at the cost of also unusually high mana issues, and Kael's super dominant transcendent form at level 16 at the cost of being super weak in early levels. Kayn's power budget is pretty clear when you look at his kit. He has two forms that he can transform into, a blue assassin and a red bruiser. These forms are incredibly strong, but comes at the cost of being locked behind an orb mechanic. Transforming can take a long time, and base Kayn is noticeably weaker than many other champions at all stages of the game. As you can see, the power budget does its best to make sure that champion kits are fundamentally balanced. Kayn is stronger than average after form, but weaker than average before it. This is all great in theory, but sometimes the power budget system is wildly off the mark due to mechanics that the developers either didn't intend or didn't fully think through. For Kayn, this misfire comes through the exact mechanics of how his form orb stacking actually works. See, most players actually have no clue how Kayn's orbs work at all. Most people know that hitting melee champions grants red orbs, and hitting ranged champions grants blue orbs, but that's about all the general population, and even most Kayn mains tend to get right. You've probably heard people say that constant fighting is the best way to get orbs, or that you get more orbs the more you hit enemies. Neither of these are actually true and will actively work to make it take you longer to get form. This is why the power budget for Kayn tends to work out. People are constantly fighting to try to get form as fast as possible, which leads to people being less consistent with their form timers over the course of multiple games. To show why this is the wrong way to get form though, we'll go over exactly how the orbs work. Kayn's form bar is made up of a point system, with form being achieved at 500 points. You receive an orb once for every champion damage interaction Kayn deals. A melee orb grants 2 points, and a ranged orb grants 3 points. You get 6 points for melee takedown and 7 points for ranged takedown. Easy enough to follow so far, right? With these rules alone, fighting as much as possible is good, as it will charge the bar faster. Add in the other rules though, and it becomes a bit more complicated. Kayn's passive also has a bucket system. The bucket starts at 60 points, and is filled at a rate of a little less than 1 point per second if Kayn has been out of champion combat for at least 70 seconds. Whenever Kayn initiates champion combat, he receives extra points from the bucket equal to the amount of orbs triggered during said combat, and those points are then subtracted from the bucket. That was a lot of random words and numbers, but what it means is really simple. When you're not in champion combat for a while, your bucket gets more points. When you finally do choose to fight, your bucket unloads a bunch of the points it had saved up. Additionally, these points are multiplied depending on how late into the game you are. All of this is to say that being out of champion combat is actually not punishing at all, so there's zero reason to risk fighting all the time. Instead, the most consistent way to get form is to fight periodically on intervals. I usually tend to fight once at 3 minutes, once at 7 minutes, and then a third time anywhere after 10 minutes. This third fight will net me my form 99% of the time. This is important to know as it means you can play at a much more controlled tempo. But this is where that power budget gets knocked out of balance. Kayn being weaker pre-form is intended to be a combat handicap. It's supposed to mean that while Kayn is weaker early, he has to fight to become stronger. Once you understand how his form actually works though, this concept isn't true in the slightest. You only need to fight sparingly, and you can be very specific with the fights you pick and choose. After these low amounts of fights, your form is online and you're good to go. In essence, getting form on Kayn is significantly easier and more consistent than what most people realize, including the developers themselves, because the data they have to go off of is comprised of a bunch of people who don't properly utilize the bucket. Okay, so now we've finally gone over why Kayn is a perfect 1v9 champion. His forms are just blatantly stronger versions of champion classes, and said form is really easy to get. The handicap put in place to balance this out isn't actually a handicap at all once you know the ins and outs of it. With that out of the way, let's get into the specifics of Kayn top. First, I'll go over the basic theory as to why this pick is good, and it's very simple. For the sake of this pick, only one form exists, which is Red Kayn. You'll find yourself pretty much never picking Blue Kayn, even into enemy comps that are 5 squishy ranged champions. Why? Because Red Kayn is really good at side laning. Once Red Kayn hits his core items, there's no matching him on side. In order to be good at side laning, there's 2 main prerequisites that must be met. You must be able to win most or all 1v1s, and you must have good wave clear. Red Kayn wins basically every 1v1 in the game with no exceptions. Assassins and mages can't survive your raw damage, and tanks and bruisers can't break through your healing. On top of that, Kayn has not 1, but 4 different tools that allow him to remain safe on the enemy side of the map. His Q is a dash, his W is hard CC, his E goes through walls and grants movement speed, and his ult grants invulnerability. All 4 of these tools can be used as escape tools if necessary. The breakpoints to win out on all of these matchups are also very forgiving, with some matches being hard won at 2 items, and almost every other matchup at 2 items plus 1 component. And when I say hard won, I actually mean hard won, as in a 2.5 item Red Kayn can side lane against a 4 item enemy. I'll go over these items and breakpoints later on in the video. With this in mind, your goal in every game is to hit your core items no matter the cost. This is reason 1 why you go Kayn top over Kayn jungle. You get gold way more easily in top lane. Reason 2 is that you get access to side laning, which we already went over why it was good. Reason 3 is that top lane is the role with the most melee champions in it, meaning a good chance to get red form first in most games. With this goal in mind, I have 2 specific game plans that allow me to get there almost every time. Plan 1 is used if you lose or go even in the raw lane matchup, which is very frequent, and Plan 2 is used if you win the matchup. We'll go over Plan 2 first, as it's the much simpler one. You take this plan if you win the matchup as base Kayn. The champions in which this is applicable are, in alphabetical order, Alistar, Amumu, Blitzcrank, Kassadin, Katarina, Kayle, and Sion. For these 7 champions, you'll take a Conqueror Rune Page and start the game by running to a lane with a Thorns Blade. You start Q level 1. The game plan here is simple. Base Kayn may be weak in many aspects, but one way in which he's actually extremely strong is level 1. Q does a lot of damage for level 1 ability, has a low cooldown, and hits twice. Combined with Conqueror, you actually have an extremely deadly level 1 all-in. Despite this all-in potential, do not take Ignite, you need teleport to side lane later. That said, against those 7 champions, feel free to take Q at the first opportunity possible to force the fight. Getting an early advantage through your level 1 is pivotal, as going for plan 1 would have been a much better plan otherwise. This is why you can't just take Conqueror and match traditional Bruiser picks like Jax or Fiora. While it is true that Conqueror Kayn can contest many of these matchups early with Conqueror, it's a completely moot point later on. You lose out on significantly better primary and secondary runes, and your Conqueror will be practically invisible later due to how high Red Kayn's damage is without it. Taking Conqueror just for evening out a lane isn't a good investment, and thus it's only to be taken if it will win you the matchup outright. That being said, if you choose to ignore my advice and take Conqueror every game, you should know that Ignite Conqueror Kayn level 1 beats essentially every champion in the game. Going for the level 1 all-in kill with Q-Start and Ignite is definitely a valid way to get a lead in those games, so do with that information what you will. Now to explain plan 1, which is basically your default plan. Instead of Conqueror, you'll be taking a First Strike page. First Strike is useful at all stages of the game, and it helps you get your core items faster. It's also significantly easier to proc than Conqueror and will be helpful for any short trades you do end up deciding to take in lane. The plan starts out right at level 1, and it involves starting Cole and going for a topside invade. I go for this invade every game. If you end up dying, it's not the end of the world. To avoid dying as much as possible though, I like to try to go through Baron Pit on blue side, which dodges out on 5 points. Invading on red side is much more of a gamble, but you usually get lucky since mid laners tend to AFK run to turret anyway. Once you get the invade off, you'll run through the jungle all the way to these points on red and blue side. The goal here is that you're starting a level 1 proxy between the tier 2 and 3 turrets. When you do this, one of a few following scenarios will unfold. Scenario 1 is that nobody comes to contest you. If this happens, just keep proxying until someone does, or until you run out of mana, in which you'll just execute. This scenario is beneficial to you because it allows you to get as many coal stacks as possible for free, while also ensuring that you hit every minion. Upon executing, you'll have plenty of time to run back to lane and you won't even need to teleport since there's no way for you to lose. Scenario 2 is that the top laner will come to contest you. This is the second most common outcome, but usually doesn't happen. If this occurs, your plan is just to stall as long as possible. What will happen is that in the time it takes for them to chase or kill you and then run back to lane, they'll have lost the entire first wave turret. This means you're basically guaranteed a level advantage, which you can use to your benefit. Scenario 3 is that the jungler will come to contest you. Same as before, you'll stall as hard as possible. Any time the enemy jungler is spending on you is equal to time they aren't spending on their own jungle camps. This means they'll have less XP for very important breakpoints. They can't get level 4 for scuttles since there won't be time for full clearing, meaning your jungler gets scuttles for free. Additionally, they won't be level 5 for the first spawn of grubs or dragon, since that requires starting your second rotation of camps, which they won't have had time for either. Basically, it's good for your team. Scenario 4 is that the mid laner comes to contest you. Again, you'll just stall as hard as possible. This time it's the same as top, but it's the enemy mid who is losing out. They might kill you, but they'll lose midway for it. Mid laners in particular are actually quite funny, as a lot of them can't even kill you in the first place. They either need Ignite to do it, or they'll just need to burn flash as you're escaping, or they can't even kill you at all, or you just straight up beat them in the 1v1. If any of these happen, it's obviously even better. The final scenario is that multiple people come to contest you, which is obviously fine for the same reasons as every other scenario. You should expect these scenarios to happen most frequently in the order which I presented them, with the most likely outcome being that you are free to proxy the first few waves. But why are we proxying instead of just running to lane and playing the early game standard? There are a few reasons for this, most of which we've already mostly touched on. 1, because Kayn loses a lot of raw matchups. The more time you can spend out of the matchup farming for free, the better. If nobody contests your proxy, then effectively what happens is that both sides get perfect CS since there are no minions to take your last hits. For this reason, proxying is nice on champions that have great late games. 2, the more coal stacks you can get for free, the better. For those unaware, coal is literally just a flat 180 gold increase if you can get all the stacks. The incentive to not take coal is usually that it makes your lane phase weaker, but we can take it on Kayn since the lane dynamic is significantly less important due to his proxying and wave clear. 3, being out of combat at the start of the game is beneficial due to the way the bucket fills. By not trading at the minute-and-a-half mark when minions collide, and instead potentially delaying these trades until 4 minutes, your bucket fills a lot more and allows you to get form more easily later. Of course, Kayn is just really good at proxying in general. Level 1, you can kill the entire wave with just 2 Qs. The cooldown early is 7 seconds, so the entire wave disappears in 8 seconds. There's almost no level 1 champ who can match that speed, and it's fast enough that you can even proxy a wave, ward raptors, and then get back to the next wave in time. The other side ward is a lot easier as the wolves are right there. I usually wait 2 waves before I ward this one though, since most junglers cross at around 230 these days. So now we've established that proxying is good. Proxying early is obviously pretty self-explanatory, but how do we proxy after that? Well, there's a few ways you can do it. The first way is the most preferred, and you can do it pretty much whenever nobody contests your current proxy and you have teleport up. You just keep proxying while keeping an eye on the enemy top laner. They'll be catching the wave at some point, so they'll appear in the minimap. However, they will at some point need to reset and spend gold. At this point, they'll recall. You can tell when this happened because they won't show on the wave. You can also intuitively figure out when they want to recall after a while based on their current item spikes. If they do recall, you clear the current wave, recall yourself, and immediately teleport back to lane. The ideal scenario from this is that you reach the next wave before they do, can instantly clear it, and then can E through the wall to get back on the opponent's side as they finally come back to clear the wave that you just pushed. In terms of starting a proxy from scratch, there are 2 ways to do it. The traditional way is to stack waves by slow pushing. If you get 2 or 3 minion waves together, your opponent theoretically can't trade into you without losing the trade due to all the minion aggro. There are some matchups where this isn't possible, but I'll go over what to do in those matchups later. Once you have a fat wave conjured up, you can crash it into the turret and simply walk past the opponent. They can't actually follow you. If they do, it's really bad for them. They have 3 waves under their turret and will lose it all if they follow you for too long. Most top laners already know this and will stick around to farm the wave. This means you can start your proxy. If they do follow you, don't panic. You still have all the tools necessary to escape. Gromp Wall and Krug's Wall in particular are great because you can Q straight through them. The enemy can't follow you unless they have their own dash or flash up. Even if they do this, you can just E back to the other side for some ring around the rosy antics. Let's say though that you're in a position where the wave is already pushing away from you and you don't have the time to build up a slow push. If you have the ability to walk up to the wave without dying, you can actually just go right in their face and clear the wave anyway. The idea here is that you're forcing one wave to crash and you can then E through the wall to the other side to start the proxy faster. The downside to this is that it's not as bad for the enemy to leave their turret to chase you. They still risk losing a wave though, so it's not super common that they'll do so. The third way is if you think you're in a really bad spot. This includes if they have a freeze on you, or if the lane state is even, but they're zoning you off really badly. At this point, you just cut your losses and start proxying anyway. If it's that bad, sacking one wave isn't actually as terrible as it might seem. Their freezing or zoning tools would have denied you more than 6 minions of XP anyway, so knowing when to cut your losses and sack the wave to start a proxy is important. Now you've got the proxy off. The standard proxy pattern is to clear the wave between the tier 1 and 2 turrets, then run into fog. From there, you get into position between their tier 2 and tier 3 turrets and clear that. At this point, you have a few options. Option 1 is to keep ducking in and out of fog to continue the tier 2 and 3 proxy. The minigame you're playing with the enemy team is that, surely the Kayn resets after this one. Then you pop out and farm the wave once everyone has decided not to waste their time to check, and you repeat over and over. Get those free minions and free scaling. While you're doing this, keep an eye out for option 2, which you can do anytime you know all the enemies are on the map. If they are, go into their base and start double proxying. By taking top and mid wave, you accelerate your scaling even more. Remember that nothing outscales red Kayn on side lane, so taking as much gold as possible is essentially always good. Intuitively, this might also seem really bad for your mid laner since you're essentially sucking gold away from them. However, if your mid laner has any brain cells, they'll know that you just gave them the freest reset of their lives and they'll take it. Minion waves spawn once every 30 seconds, at the 5 and 35 second marks of the minute respectively. If you're going to double proxy, go into base about 5 or 6 seconds before the waves spawn. Double proxying also has a major benefit in that enemies always panic when this happens. They see someone in their base and mentally decide that this shouldn't be allowed. People always come to contest you when you do this, which is great for your team because you have 50 escape tools and can waste their time forever. Bonus points if the one who comes to contest you is a utility jungler or support, because those guys will unknowingly just turbocharge your form bar without being able to kill you. It seems stupid for them to do so, but trust me, it definitely happens sometimes. Option 3, and the safest option to take, is just to reset on the spot after clearing between tier 2 and 3. It's quite literally a free reset since you'll beat the next wave back to lane without using teleport. These options are available to you, but make sure you keep an eye out for a few more things. 1. If the next turret plate is close to going down. The easiest way to deal with an enemy proxying on you is to let the wave crash into turret, since the turret damage breakpoints on minion health are really easy to farm with. When this happens, the turret will inevitably take damage over time. It's important not to miss a plate by accident when they do this. Plates are the best way to get gold in the game, as they don't impact the bounty system at all, or at least it should still work like this. As of the start of 2024, there's nothing in the turret patch notes that would suggest they removed this. Speaking of turret plates, the big second thing to look out for is if the enemy top just decided to reset or roam. You can tell because the wave will get near turret and there won't be anyone in sight on the minimap. If this happens, you should be prepared to book it back to the turret as fast as possible to collect your free plate or two.
One thing you should not be on the lookout for is worrying if people are coming to contest you. Once you've gotten the proxy off, you've already won. Anybody taking the time to contest you will not only be screwing up their own tempo by taking the time to run top, but will also be feeding you free form stacks. Don't even bother worrying about the enemy team contesting unless it's something super obvious like the jungler actively clearing their topside camps as you're starting the proxy. So now we've done all this rambling about proxying. However, what if, for some reason, you just can't proxy? There are actually some matchups where this is the case. It occurs when the enemy champion you're against can do both of the following: fight you in the middle of stacked waves and win, and delete you extremely quickly in isolated 1v1s. If they can do both, that means that stacking the waves to proxy is off the table, and stacking waves is off the table as well, since they can follow you, kill you, and get back to their wave easy peasy. This should go without saying, but you also can't stack waves against champions who can take your whole turret with one wave. Champs like Trundle come to mind. Fret not though, as there is one simple change you can make to your game that bandages the vast majority of these non-proxyable matchups. The key to these matchups is to max W instead of Q. So first, the one side to maxing W over Q. You do less damage. That's the entire downside. Now that we've gotten the downside out of the way, here are the upsides. W has much longer range and can be used from far away, which means you have a lot of safety in the lane with this skill. You can poke the enemy, farm creeps, and disengage well with W. Additionally, your wave clear interactions do not change in the slightest when maxing W. In fact, they arguably get better because putting points in W reduces the cooldown by a full second, whereas Q points only reduce the cooldown by half a second. Take the Riven matchup for example. Riven is one of the aforementioned champions who can delete you very quickly, and she's got enough mobility in her kit to actually contest your proxy without losing much. Don't proxy against Riven unless it looks really good. Let's say you try plan 2 against Riven and take Conqueror. You'll lose every fight anyway, so this option doesn't work. If you default to the first variation of plan 1 and max Q, you'll still lose. Any fight you take is losing because you Q right into her face, which allows her to hit everything. You're left with a useless skill that you can't use. However, max W and the whole dynamic of the matchup changes. She doesn't have any tools to instantly gap close through your W unless she flashes on top of you. Even if she does, your ult is your get out of jail free card and has a much shorter cooldown than flash. If she starts to Q or E towards you, a well placed W from range will slow her enough that you can Q backwards and be fine. Now you spend the duration of the matchup letting her shove into you while you collect farm safely with W. With all of that proxy skill max talk done with, I have one more tip for your early game. Don't be afraid to die. I promise it's not the end of the world. If your opponent has a freeze on you and it looks dire, just shove the wave at the cost of your own life. If people contest your proxy and you can't live, stay calm and stall as long as possible before dying. As long as you don't lose any golden XP, dying is fine. Remember, you're getting to your core items at all costs. If this means you have 7 deaths at 15 minutes, so be it. In fact, you can even use deaths to your advantage at times. Since base Kayn isn't killing anyone anyway, if you're able to stack deaths up against the enemy top laner in a way that you don't lose minions and don't ever let them get to your turret, all that will happen is that you slowly become worth less and less gold to kill while their shutdown gets bigger and bigger. Once you hit form and a few items, you'll one-shot them on side lane anyway and get that juicy shutdown back. This happens in most games for me, to the point where building up the shutdown and taking it 10 minutes later is a routine part of my game plan. Of course, the plan goes south when someone else takes the shutdown, but it's still fine if you're keeping pace with your gold per minute. Alright, assuming you followed this guide to a T, it's near the 10 to 12 minute mark, and you now have anywhere from 8 to 12 CS per minute and are sitting at like 2/3 form. Shove the wave and look for any opportunity to just go for an all-in. Your death doesn't matter, this all-in will give you form due to your bucket. Welcome to mid-game. Okay, at this point you should have a few things accomplished. Your call is done, you already have tier, you have your first completed item, and you just got form. You're really strong, but not strong enough to steamroll your matchup. For now, assume you still lose the extended 1v1 against the enemy top. You have a lot more freedom though, as your W is now a knockup, and your base damage and sustain are way higher. Before we can get into how form changes all your lane dynamics though, there's just one more quick transition tip from early to mid I need to give. Form change gives you a lot of movement speed. This is technically to balance out the time it takes for you to transform, but in practice it actually just makes you way faster at the end of the day. You can speed this up even more by using Home Guard's movement speed to run parallel to the turret. You can change form right up to this point. This is important because it means you get back to lane super fast on the base where you get form. Your ghosted movement speed makes it all the way back to your tier 1 turret and then some. All this is to say that you should avoid teleporting back to lane after getting form. If you really want tempo from teleport, I recommend teleporting back to lane right before you get form. Now we actually talk about mid game. To preface this section, I'll now go over items and runes. Usually I do items at the end of my guides, but since so much of this playstyle is about prioritizing your item spikes, it's pretty handy to know the item spikes beforehand. I'll do runes here too, since I don't like the thought of separating runes and items. For runes, the Conqueror page is Conqueror, Triumph, Tenacity, and Coup de Grace with Demolish and Bone Plating. Remember, you're only taking the Conqueror page if it flat out wins you the matchup. You don't need Presence of Vine since you'll have Tear, and Coup de Grace is more valuable than Last Stand because you'll be trading heavily in the first few minutes when extra damage at low health is most valuable. You'll still need Demolish though, or else your side lane will be worse later in the game. The First Strike page is First Strike, Magical Footwear, Minion Demat, and Cosmic Insight with Demolish and Conditioning. This rune page is significantly better 95% of the time. While the Conqueror Keystone might be better than the First Strike Keystone in isolation, having access to Cosmic Insight and Minion Demat is way better than anything the Precision Tree can offer. Minion Demat in particular is great because it changes a lot of your minion breakpoints. Do 1 each for this rune. You'll notice it instantly if you don't take it because you'll notice your Q leaving ranged minions at like 2 health if you only land one part of it. Same with melee minions, they usually won't die from both parts of Q without Demat. Conditioning is great with the First Strike page as it makes your side laning stronger later. The usual downside of it taking time to come into effect is not super important since you're not really interacting with the enemy laner that much. Now for items. Assuming the enemy team doesn't have anything tricky and you can AFK your build path, it's as follows. Start Cole, get Tyrion first back, then Tiamat next if possible. Feel free to finish your Ionian boots as soon as the magical footwear comes through. Your core build is Profane Hydra, Metamune, Lord Doms, Ghostblade, and Eclipse in that order. Profane Hydra is the highest damage rush item on the patch and also acts as a bandage fix if you ever miss an ability while wave clearing. The Execute style active on Profane is also great on Red Kayn since he is great at one-shotting targets. Metamune is next, and this is going to be a big chunk of your damage due to the Shock and Awe passives. You also need mana for side laning since your abilities have a very low cooldown but moderate mana costs. Next you go Lord Doms. It was Cyrilda's in Season 13, but new Cyrilda's had its armor penetration cut by 10 if you have no lethality. Even with Profane and later with Ghostblade, you'll still never get anywhere close to the 30% the passive used to have. On the flip side, Lord Doms still has 30% armor pen, has more AD than last season, and the Giant Slayer passive is good because you aren't building any health items whereas your opponent likely is. Cyrilda's is bait, Lord Doms is king this season. I also believe this for Ezreal as a quick side note, do with that information what you will. Ghostblade is great as a 4th item for the extra lethality, but mainly the movement speed. Finally, I go Eclipse last. I take Ghostblade before Eclipse because the percent max health damage on Eclipse is better when you have more armor pen first. Now to go over why some of the other items aren't as great. Hubris Rush is decent, but is overall less damage than Profane Hydra. Cyclosword can be handy, but is a bit awkward and is also hard countered by Bramble Vest. Fighting against people with Bramble is easy since you can just not auto-attack, but Cyclosword obviously requires this. Opportunity might seem nice for the increased movement speed, but Red Kayn doesn't really benefit from this since he's always going to be either directly in the enemy's faces during teamfights or in isolated 1v1s. Some items are good situationally. Certain matchups will require Mortal Reminder instead of Lord Doms, but you still get 30% armor pen so the damage difference isn't that bad. After that, your next 2 items can be situational. Axiom Mark can be good since Red Kayn is fairly reliant on his ult, and Serpent's Fang is best in slot against comps with a lot of shields. Other bruiser items can be decent like Shojin or Hullbreaker. Just use your best judgment for those. What isn't decent is Black Cleaver. It caps out at 24% armor pen, and Kayn stacks it pretty slowly since his main combo of W auto Q auto only gets 5 of the 6 needed stacks. Black Cleaver also locks you out of Lord Doms or Mortal Reminder. Finally, Ionian Boots is almost always better than Tappies or Mercs, and tank items are pretty much off the table. Red Kayn's healing scales with how much damage he's doing, so more damage means tankier Kayn. If you want to be tankier, just build more armor pen. The only time when this doesn't apply is if you're being hit with point and click CC and one shot. No, Rengar flying out of nowhere and killing you 100-0 doesn't count. If you're good enough, then you can time the W to knock him up midair and kill him before he gets his damage off. Most one-shots have counterplay if you use your brain. Now you know what item spikes you're going for. In mid-game, the big spike you're looking for is Last Whisper. This is why I'm forcing the Lord Dom's Mortal Reminder third. Last Whisper is the key component that completely flips most of your matchups. Some matchups are flipped at Metamune, and others are flipped right when you get Form, but more likely than not, the matchup flips at Last Whisper. Combining 18% armor pen with a completed Metamune is where you start one-shotting every bruiser and seriously hurting most tanks. Remember when I said the goal is to get your core items at all costs? You can actually tell whether you're on good pace or not. My litmus test for determining if I'm on pace to carry a game is Metamune at 18 minutes. This is achievable in 99% of your games. It's a good check-in point because most people stop short of taking inhibs before 20 minutes. If you get to Metamune Last Whisper before your base is taken, the game is super free. So how do we get to this point? We're now back to that spot where we just did Profane Hydra and Form. For one, proxying is still in the menu. Just because we now have Form and can trade a bit doesn't change the fact that proxying is still the best way to get golden XP. You'll notice a few differences though, such as your wave clear being a lot better. Kayn red form Q does more damage, especially to jungle camps. If you happen to get a proxy off now, take the time to scout out their jungle and steal camps. Also, now that you're a lot stronger, you can play more aggressively for turrets. Your objectives in the game are to take turrets and to continue to farm efficiently. Turret gold recently got buffed across the board, so turrets are dummy overpowered as of making this video. With Kayn's superior wave clear and demolish, taking turrets is easy. It's also good to note that red Kayn has a lot more outplay tools than base Kayn, especially if the enemy tries to dive you. Since you have a knockup and your ult heals a good chunk of your health bar, you're mostly undiveable. Once lane phase is done, the way I like to play mid game is the same as most split pushers, which is figure out what the next major objective is and split in the lane furthest from it. If Dragon is next, go top, and if Herald is next, go bot. I also like to prioritize lanes that still have a tier 2 turret alive, as those are where the biggest gold influxes come from. It didn't really matter before since you lost every trade anyway, but now is the time to go over most of your trade patterns. Your short trade pattern is to just land W over and over again. If it hits, they can't trade back on you since knockups are uncancelable and uncleansable. I like to spam my W, but be careful that they can't take the opportunity to use a miss W to fully commit onto you and kill you. If you miss W, Q away instantly and play from range until W is back. Your regular trade combo is going to be either W auto Q auto Hydra, or Q auto W auto Hydra. These are especially good if you're right next to a wall since you can E away after the combo is done to avoid being traded back onto. Keep in mind though, your E will kick you out of the wall in 1.5 seconds if you're in combat. You can still make it through most thick walls if you Q through before being kicked out though. In fact, this idea is a great way to maneuver around the map. Your E also cancels if you're out of terrain for 1.5 seconds, which means many gaps seem uncrossable. However, a lot of these gaps are doable if you Q to them instead, which makes up a lot of ground. I'll show some of those now. Your all-in combo is as follows. You start with the regular trade combo, then you keep fighting as long as possible. As soon as you know you'll die before you can get another Q or W off, ult them. Hold the ult until either your Q or W comes back, then immediately go for your regular trade combo again upon coming out of ult. This combo will win you most fights, and the lethal threshold is way higher than most people expect. The only way to really know if you can kill is by playing hundreds of Kayn games, but you'll learn that this combo does way more damage than people are prepared for, especially once you hit those item spikes. It's also good to know that at this point your ult will basically replenish your entire health bar, especially if you ult a tankier target. Not so much when you only have Hydra, but ults with Last Whisper are really good for deceiving people since they don't realize they basically have to kill you 100-0 twice to win. For the remainder of mid game, keep looking for potential all-ins and turret takes on side lane. Teleporting to objectives to flank can be good, but I wouldn't prioritize it. Once you hit that Ghost Blade completion, you're officially at late game. Congratulations, you've won the game. No, but honestly, you have all the tools you need to win pretty much every game now, so if you lose, it's 99% your own fault. With 4 completed items, you beat everyone on side lane even if they're full build. You one-shot every squishy and bruiser, you melt through tanks in like 5 seconds, you take turrets in the blink of an eye, and you win most 1v2 and 1v3 scenarios. Late game is a lot about positioning in teamfights, and your big goal if you're looking for a teamfight is to find a flank angle. Red Kayn flanks are crazy as you can camp the flank safely with your E. If they ever have to run into you, you just one-shot whoever it is. You'll stay full health too, since your passive will heal back whatever they just did to you. Again, the only way you can die at this point is if you're either CC'd or one-shot. You can avoid both of these things with good positioning. If they do catch you and fail to one-shot you, your ult will literally just heal you back to full and likely kill a target at the same time. In all but maybe 2 or 3 games in the last year where I made it to 4 items but still lost, I found that the loss was due to a personal mistake I made. Only in extremely rare scenarios will you outright lose. One of these scenarios I ran into was a full build Kayle who had enchanters while my nexus was open. Even then, we still almost clawed back a victory after Kayle mispositioned once and died side lane to my one shot. If you side lane well, flank correctly, and take good fights, you'll win these games. As for how to navigate teamfights, I have a few tips. If you know who your priority target is, I recommend looking for a flash Q to get onto them. This is especially useful if the priority target is a marksman or mage, as a flash Q into ult will pretty much always one-shot them. Another tip I have is to try to save W for after you ult. When Kayn ults, enemies like to clump around the ulted target so they can collapse on Kayn when he comes out. You can prepare for this and look to line up a big W on multiple people out of the ult as a W, and that both hits of Q will be enough to kill most people on its own, as well as heal you back to full again. Flash W can be good, but it's risky. W has a buffer time before it actually knocks anyone up, so there's a chance they can dash out, flash out, or even walk out if they have good enough reaction speed. I wouldn't recommend a flash W unless you're out of vision before you do it. Preferably your teamfights are never even in the first place. Since Kayn can kill anyone on side lane, I always try to go for side lane picks first before the fight starts. My final tip for you is to pay attention to when you choose to release your ult. Usually it's good to wait until your Q and W are back, but depending on if they have heals or shields, it's necessary to cast ult right away to get the damage off before the sustain comes through. With that, that's everything I have for you on how to actually navigate the different stages of the game. There's one big thing left to go over, and that's the actual breakpoints and playstyles for each matchup. Fully grasping your lethal ranges and matchup mechanics might take time, but I can do my best to give you a head start. I sorted out the matchups into a bunch of categories, starting with easy, medium, hard, and very hard matchups, and then organizing them further into skill max, keystone, and item turning points. I also only included champions that I think people realistically have a chance at running into multiple times in top lane. The rest you'll just have to use your creative imagination for. Starting off with the 7 easiest matchups, we've got the aforementioned Alistar, Amumu, Blitzcrank, Kassadin, Katarina, Kayle, and Sion. All of these are rated as easy matchups, all are Q-max, you can proxy against all of them, you take Conqueror, and you win starting at level 1. The one asterisk to this clump is with Kayle, as the matchup is still easy when she hits level 6, but becomes medium at 11 and hard at 16. Next up is Naafiri, who is also rated easy with Q-max and proxy capability, but the breakpoint is at Manamune, and the keystone is First Strike. Continuing on, there's a large group in the next category. Bel'Veth, Galio, Hecarim, J4, Malphite, Maokai, Nautilus, Sejuani, Shyvana, Sylas, Viego, and Zac are all rated easy with Q-max, First Strike, and proxy capability, but the breakpoint isn't until Last Whisper. Briar is a medium difficulty matchup due to her aggressive trading pattern if you're overextended, but can be dealt with using First Strike, W-max, and proxy strats. The breakpoint is right when you get Red Form. Quinn is the exact same, except you don't win until you have both Red Form and Profane Hydra. Yone is a medium difficulty First Strike Q-max matchup with proxy capability and a breakpoint at Manamune. Akali, Ashe, Gangplank, Jace, Kennen, Renekton, Ryze, Teemo, and Vayne are all the same as Yone except for requiring a W-max instead of a Q-max. In general, W-max is needed against ranged champions or champions whose trading tools outrange your Q-dash. You also need it against champions like Renekton, as the slow is necessary to disengage from their own engage, it being Renekton's E in this case. Cho'Gath, Dr. Mundo, Echo, Alawi, Cassante, Lee Sin, Mordekaiser, Ornn, Rammus, Shen, Singed, Tahm Kench, Vi, Volibear, Warwick, Wukong, Xin Zhao, and Yorick are all medium difficulty First Strike Q-max matchups with proxy capability and an item breakpoint at Last Whisper. Camille, Darius, Fiora, Garen, Gnar, Gragas, Gwen, Jax, Lilia, Nasus, Set, Tryndamere, Udyr, Vladimir, and Yasuo are all the same except for a W-max. Riven is a medium difficulty matchup with First Strike, W-max, and a breakpoint at Last Whisper, but you cannot proxy against her due to her high all-in burst damage and high mobility. Olaf is a medium difficulty matchup with First Strike, Q-max, and proxy capability, but the breakpoint isn't until you turn the Last Whisper into a Mortal Reminder. Aphelios, Ivern, Morgana, Rengar, Varus, and Zilean are all hard difficulty W-max First Strike matchups due to how aggressive their poke and trading patterns are early, but all of them can be proxied out of, and all of them have a breakpoint at Manamune. Nocturne is the same, but cannot be proxied against due to his ultimate being a point-and-click follow. Akshan, Cassiopeia, Graves, Aurelia, Kled, Pantheon, Rumble, and Urgot are all hard difficulty W-max First Strike matchups that you can proxy out of, but the item breakpoint isn't until Last Whisper. Graves and Urgot are especially annoying since they play like melee champions but provide blue orbs, delaying your form by 4 minutes. Trundle is also in this category but requires a completed Mortal Reminder to beat. Karma is also in this same category, but requires a 4th item Serpent's Fang to beat due to how tanky she is with Mantra W plus E shield. Kayn top only has 2 hard counters, the first of which is Poppy, a very hard difficulty matchup with Q-max and First Strike. Poppy hard counters Kayn due to her W completely shutting down Kayn's kit in teamfights. However, this matchup flips in Kayn's favor on side lane once he hits Red Form, although you likely won't be able to kill her at all. The other very hard difficulty matchup is Aatrox, who requires a W-max with First Strike. Aatrox is Kayn's hardest lane matchup because his Q1 and W outrange Kayn's W, meaning Kayn is not allowed to walk up to the wave to farm or poke. Aatrox's trade pattern does not allow Kayn to interact, meaning Kayn cannot build up slow pushes or even die to push the wave. As such, proxying is usually not possible. The one saving grace of this matchup is that Kayn wins upon completing Last Whisper. Aatrox's healing is only from his damage to champions, meaning that this does not come into play when Kayn simply 100 to 0s Aatrox without being hit back due to ult. I still recommend turning the Last Whisper into Mortal Reminder though. There you go, that's every matchup I could bother to write down in my Kayn top matchup spreadsheet. I'll provide a link to the spreadsheet in the description of this video. Most of it was gathered through my actual experience playing the lanes, but a lot of it is assisted through my own judgments and speculation. For example, I have yet to play Kayn into Karma, but I do know that Karma top is viable, and I also know that her trade patterns are insane due to my own time spent playing Karma top. That's everything I have for you. If you liked this video, be sure to check out my Twitch. I'm oftentimes streaming Kayn top and solo queue, so come watch to see it in action. I also have a Discord server, links to both will be in the description. I also have a Ko-fi page, and any tips are highly appreciated. See you next time. Bye.